Hello, good morning. For those of you in the States, good afternoon. For those of you across the pond, this is Bernard with Cdisc, and thank you for joining us this morning. I wanted to welcome you to our C-SAE project webinar, where we will be discussing this project. And I've got a couple of just quick bits to get through before we get started. That's not at all where we wanted to be. That's where we need to be. So just going to introduce our presenter. We have a handful of other folks who are involved in the project who are going to help out with the Q&A. So please submit some questions as we're going along. I've got some housekeeping. We'll get into the feature presentation, do a Q&A, and then I have some info about our upcoming learning opportunities, including webinars and in-person trainings. So our main presenter is my colleague, John Owen, my colleague from across the pond. We're working internationally right now. John is a UK-based consultant, project manager, and technical expert, having extensive experience in managing therapeutic area projects. And since 2013, he's delivered 6 TA user guides, including QT studies, hepatitis C, breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, and nutrition. And in addition to the C-SAE project, he's currently working on type 1 diabetes, Crohn's disease, and pediatrics projects. He's held technical roles as a senior programming analyst and database manager since forming his consultancy business in 1990, and has been providing database design and related data management services to major global pharma and CRO companies. And for the past 10 years, he's been providing clinical data standards expertise with more focus on Cdisc standards over the recent years, for which we are quite grateful. So we've also got some of our folks from the team who are going to be joining us for the Q&A. We've got Gary Walker, who you probably will recognize his name. He's a regular staple in our webinars. We've also got Karen Outen from Merck, Kimberly Rivera from Pfizer, and Michelle Burrell from Johnson & Johnson. So just quick housekeeping bits. You, the audience, will remain on mute for the entirety of the call, but we encourage you to submit questions through the question section of your GoToWebinar toolbar. If you are having any audio issues, if the sound's coming in and out, if things seem like they've frozen, take a look over at your GoToWebinar toolbar and you'll see an audio section. And if you've connected by a computer audio, should be 3 little bars right next to it that show your connectivity. Your local connection is typically the culprit of any connectivity issues, audio issues and things like that. So check that, make sure your connection's not messing up. If it looks fine, but you're still having issues, just shut down your GoToWebinar app and then restart it. That typically shakes loose whatever it is that's causing the problem. And otherwise, if you continue to have problems, just let me know via the question section of the toolbar. You can just let me know that you can't hear, and we will try to do whatever we can to help out. We will also be making these slides available, as well as a recording of this webinar available in the members only section of the Cdisc website. So probably late this week, we'll have that posted up. Just make sure that you've got a login for the Cdisc website if you haven't created one already. Next up, so in terms of submitting questions, that's the question section. That's what it looks like in your toolbar. You can submit them at any time. We'll hold questions until the end of in our Q&A section. And then as we're presenting, I know John's going to do the primary bit, but in case we have any other of our panelists who want to hop in and add pieces, if you have a question specifically for somebody, just put their name in front of the question. Now, boring content disclaimer. The purpose of this webinar is to provide examples of implementation and should not be considered official recommendations by Cdisc unless otherwise stated in the presentation. And this webinar is not an authorized Cdisc course, is not developed or delivered under Cdisc operating procedures, and should not replace a published standard. Please refer to the latest published standards for the most authoritative implementation information. Say that 3 times fast. All right, now, without further ado, John, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to you, sir, so that we can get started with the primary presentation. Here you go.
Great, thank you very much, Bernard. And again, just like to say a big welcome to everybody. I think we've got a good chunk of people on the call today, so it's nice to see everybody. Hope everybody's staying safe and well in the current times. There's a lot going on. I know there's especially in the medical industry, there's a lot of quick work happening with clinical trials and coping with the coronavirus. So thanks very much for attending. Okay, so today I would like to change tack a little bit from my usual webinars about therapeutic area user guides and talk to you a little bit about the Cdisc serious adverse event project that we're currently running. So in terms of the project itself, I want to just give a little bit of information about Cdisc. This project spans from, probably our traditional audience that are familiar with dealing with Cdisc standards, but may cross over to some of our colleagues in the safety arena as well. So I just got a few slides just to provide some little bit of background info about Cdisc and Cdash. So for those of you who are familiar, it'll be a bit of a light refresher. So that will give hopefully a little bit of background to those guys that haven't had much exposure to Cdash. Then I'll go into a little bit about the project history, where we currently are in the project, and then just a brief summary at the end. It's not going to be a long webinar. The purpose of this is really just to highlight that the project is ongoing, just make sure it's on the radar with yourselves and with your organizations, so that when it comes time, for example, a public review, you've at least heard about the project. As Bernard mentioned, the recording will be made and the slides will be made available. So please feel free to distribute those within your organizations. And if you are or if you have colleagues in your safety groups that you think would be interested in re-watching or watching the webinar once it's made available, please let them know. It's very much a cross-departmental project, this one is. Okay, so let's start a little bit about Cdisc. So Cdisc was formed as an organization, a non-profit organization, back in 2000, and this year is our 20th year anniversary. So we have over 450 members. We're very much a consensus-based standards development organization. The input from our volunteers and members is vital to move us forward and to keep the standards relevant. We've got ongoing support not only in America but in Europe and in Japan, China, India, Korea and other regions. And the standards are global, downloaded in over 90 countries. And certainly with regulatory authorities, so the US FDA and the Japanese PMDA requiring data, patient level data to be submitted and analysis data to be submitted in Cdisc standards for regulated drug trials. But a little bit about the drivers. So as I mentioned, the regulation is sort of one of the key drivers, but really as new technologies, new discoveries are happening, new data types are being developed, new, with advances in technology as well. So keeping up with how to represent such data in a standardized format is another one of the key drivers. Electronic health records, I think real world data is, a big topic at the moment. I think it has been for certainly the last few conferences I've attended. Real world data has been one of the big areas that people are looking into. But all this data now, our lives driven by data to a certain extent. And I think, looking at one of the statistics from San Diego interchange, that only 40% of our data for our clinical studies is coming from a case report form. 60% coming from other sources. So certainly having to ensure that the standards are fit for use for those sources of data as well. So I mentioned our teams and our volunteers are the backbone to Cdisc, really, and in this project as well, it's built up of Cdisc representatives and volunteers from companies. So that's really one of our key areas that moves our standards along. And a little bit about the Cdisc library, the ecosystem that's been developed. People may have seen presentations, on the new library, or maybe not so new now. It's been around for a couple of years, but this is really making our standards machine readable and sort of elevating them so that that ability to be able for a machine to read these makes the use of the standards and the adoption, it just gives it that extra kick to help organizations keep up to date and use them. So that's a bit of background about the organization as a whole. This is just a high-level summary of the standards that we develop. Just that top line here, Cdisc standards do not dictate research questions, and I think that's quite key, is that as a standards development organization, we don't tell people what to research. We don't tell people what data you have to collect for certain studies. That really is in the remit outside of Cdisc. We will tell you how to represent that data in the Cdisc standardized format, but we don't dictate those questions at all. But really, our standards run through from the preclinical standards, so the SEND standards you see on the left-hand side, and really moving through the whole clinical research process from planning through to collection. You see our C- standards, and that's where we're focusing on today. Our SDTM, or sort of the organization of our data into tabular formats, the analysis with the ADAM standards, and ultimately for sort of submission and publishing of that data. You'll see the yellow parts here. These are our sort of data exchange type standards as well, that also support that beginning to end or end to end, as it is at the bottom here, philosophy. The bridge and the control terminologies that underpins all of our standards, really making sure that the same terminologies are used across any of the standards, giving that traceability. So a little bit more about the sort of standards that, well, the one standard that we're going to be focusing on in this project. But the standards that we have do support all the major functions, the collection, the aggregation, the tabulation idea, the analysis and transfer. And today we'll focus on the data collection, the C- side of things. So just a couple of slides about C- for those that may not be that familiar, but really we see and we have seen and still see, I think, that there is unnecessary variability within how data is collected between organizations and possibly within organizations as well. And really the key to this is that is that unnecessary side, is that it doesn't have to be different. It can be standardized, and that's really where the C- standard comes in as one of its major benefits, is that it standardizes the way that we can collect data so it's consistent. And it means that across studies, within an organization and between organizations, that the same data can be collected in the same way. We can reduce that variability. Now, one of the key areas of advantages of that is providing a traceability from your collected data. through to how your STTM or your submission data that you're going to submit to the FDA. So that's traceability through the process is very key to how the standards all fit together. But really, the top line here is just being able to represent a concept to be collected in one single standard, and that's really what CDASH as a standard gives us. Okay, so we're focusing very much on this data collection in terms of this project. So a little bit about the history of the Cdisc side. So in 2013, Cdisc published the first version of the Cdisc supplement. And then we sort of move on a few years. It just been available on the website. We come to 2019, where Transcelerate Biopharma was in the process of a common serious adverse event fields project, really looking at being able to harmonize the data collection fields, ultimately to be able to submit ICSRs to regulatory authorities using the ICH E2B messages. Really, that's where Cdisc then came in to take over some of the outputs from this project in later on in 2019, where we kicked off the SAE V2 project. So you can see really it's 6 years since any updates have been made to the version 1. So it was a real opportune time to be able to make those updates. And all being well, given the current situation, we're still anticipating to publish this end of Q1 2021. So it will be available by hopefully end of March. So C-SAE V1, the intent of this supplement really was to be able to expand the data collection side of the adverse event domain and related domains. Instead, in addition to collecting those data that are used for submission, the version 1 also included additional elements, data elements that could be captured on a serious adverse event form, for example, and this data could then be transferred to a safety database, which with the intent of being able to facilitate the generation of E2B messages, really for the reporting of ICSRs to the authorities. And so that was developed and published, and at the time this was based on E2B release 2. There was a note in version 1 that E2B-R3 was available but wasn't implemented in certain jurisdictions, and so it was decided to develop this against R2. So then the Transcelerate project, this was led by Transcelerate, and as I mentioned before, it was really the intent to look at to be able to increase quality and comprehensiveness of SAE reports. And so the project team from Transcelerate and some of their member companies were really looking over the core fields, the common core fields that were being collected and reported in terms of adverse events. And one of the outputs of that was a list of SAE fields that would help support this serious adverse event reporting. And really, this is where the connection now comes in to Cdisc, because we now have a list of SAE fields that have had that review from the Transcelerate guys. And so with the support from Transcelerate, we initiated the version 2 project, and the intent is to update version 1 with the inputs from the Transcelerate deliverables. The intent of version 2 will be the same. It's how to structure SAE concepts, regulated clinical trials. It will align with E2B release 3. And it will also give us a chance to move the original standards to our most recent templates, and make any updates to changes to standards that have happened. So it works in really nicely with the outputs from the Trancelerate project. We assembled a team, both from Cdisc members of Cdash team and from Trancelerate. And so we've got standards development experts, and experts in the safety area, pharmacovigilance areas, and the data experts that deal with the regular clinical trial data. We had a kickoff meeting in the US Interchange in 2019, as we all managed to get together face to face and meet up. We kicked off the meeting, and since then we've been really looking at the deliverables from the Trancelerate project, and looking at how that impacts version 1 and what development work we need to do in terms of Cdash content for version 2. So where are we in the project at the moment? The project is following the Cdisc standards development process. So we've had the traditional scoping phase, the concept modeling and development phase, and then we'll go through the review phases over the next few months with the intent of publishing. So here are the current timelines. As you can see, we're at April 2020, we're the W1, the webinar 1. And this is really focusing, to give an idea of, what the project is about before we sort of hit into public review, just to make people aware of the project and what's coming up. So we're anticipating mid-June to finish the standards development. We'll then move into an internal review phase, which again is part of our standards development process. We'll focus on some targeted reviewers in the foundational teams. We'll take a look at the standard. Once we've resolved those comments, we'll move into a public review phase, which is anticipated in October, where we'll conduct a second public webinar, and we'll be able to show in a little bit more detail, what has been developed throughout the project. So that will take us into January, February next year, and then we'll move into our publication phase in March, where we intend to do a third webinar publication webinar as well. So we should have quite a nice series of webinars for people to follow. Okay, I think one of the major things that we identified very early on is that actually the difference between E2B, R2 and R3, is reasonably significant in terms of the structure. Here I've just shown sort of the high level classes of content, really, and you can see immediately, A's and B's have now been replaced with C's, D's, E's and F's. So there's very, relatively big changes. So we're having to assess those changes, see what was, developed originally for this supplement based on R2, see if it's still relevant for R3. We're looking to see if we can show, the transfer from R2 to R3, so people have that traceability through, and also identify those new areas within R3 that need Cdash Cdash standards developing for those. So that's one thing we noticed really, quite early on, was this big change in structure. In terms of the particular data buckets or elements areas from R3, I won't go through them, or you can see them on the screen, but these are our key areas that we'll be focusing on. And there may be some people in the audience that aren't that familiar with E2B. But really, this ICH standard allows an organization to create a message, to send ICSRs, to the regulatory authorities. So we're sort of bordering on, are probably not a traditional, project that really looks at, creating Cdash data collection metadata to collect data, which then goes into a clinical trial submission into an SDTM data set. But this is, yes, it's a different area of businesses that's interesting to see how Cdash can be used to facilitate the collection of data for safety groups in companies. So if we look at the two sort of areas, and we've, as part of the introduction of the updated document, we'll be talking a little bit about processes within organizations. And I think one area that we wanted to really define is, as we're talking within groups, we've got people from a data management group, for example, and people from a pharmacovigilance group. And they both have databases, so we're like, okay, well, to make it easy, we've got to be able to identify, terms. So we termed these two, clinical database and safety databases, to sort of make it easier during discussions. But the clinical database focusing on the data collection from an ECRF, for example, that's generally used to create submission-ready data sets for regulators, and the safety database, which is the PV databases that groups use to keep track of serious adverse events, and do the relevant regulatory reporting. So we looked as well at the Cdash as a journey, really a data journey. So we know that Cdash data or metadata that you can create, Cdash compliant CRFs, can run through to SDTM quite nicely, the tabulation model using for submission. We've got Cdash variables in the data collection tool that are maybe just operational and don't make it to to SDTM. They just remain as operational data. Maybe questions such as, well, have there been any adverse events? Yes, no. Doesn't tend to be submitted to regulatory authorities. And then we got this third area, this safety database side, where data can flow from an ECRF collection tool using various processes, and this is something we'll expand a little bit on in the version 2. Is what processes are people using? Is it fully automated? Is it manual? Is it still paper, for example? But that sort of flow, different organizations are at different levels of reaching sort of full automation. I think this sort of middleware solutions, there's quite a few different ways people are working. But in theory, our release version 2 will be as extensive as possible in terms of additional Cdash data that can be collected that potentially could make its way through to a safety database and ultimately become part of an E2B message. So that's one of our sort of key focuses. There is obviously some data that's collected in an ECRF that will also be sent to a safety database as well as to SDTM, of course, but there are those variables that will just be purely for transfer to a safety group. And we also realize there are other data sources that people may get data from. So, for example, investigator information may come from a CTMS system within an organization. Might not come from an ECRF system, but the theory we've taken is that if we can create an SDTM variable, it may be collected in an ECRF. At least that gives the information to implementers on how this was done. But we do appreciate that there are other data sources that feed into the safety database as well. Okay, so really where we're up to at the moment is the development team are currently looking at the existing content. This is just a list of information from version 1, the table of contents. So we're going to be doing our updates, creating the new metadata for the various E2B domains I listed before. We'll be then sending this, once this is developed, through our global governance group for approval for internal review. So it's just bang in the middle of that development phase at the minute. So I don't have a great deal of content to show you at the moment. That's something we will show more in the public review webinar later on this year. But really just give you the background and where we're up to in this project. So a couple of key points that I think would be really useful, to relay as part of the summary is that the anticipated review is October for the public review. It's a 60-day public review. So yeah, please keep that in mind if you have review processes within your organizations, especially engaging a different group such as a safety group would obviously be great people to help review the document as well, and that may require some organization. But if you can keep that sort of on your radars, so this will hopefully be coming out in October. We will be doing a public review webinar, which will be available online as well afterwards. The public review, and this goes for all of the Cdisc standards, it's a real key step to our consensus-driven process, really, to make sure that our standards have been through that consensus review, and that we have a standard that is fit for use, and has been fully reviewed. And all being well, we're in very uncertain times at the moment, but so far so good. We're still moving ahead with all of the projects. We're anticipating to have this published and on the Cdisc website, and of course they're always free to download from the Cdisc website by the end of Q1 2021. So with that, that's all of the information I had for you today. If there's any questions, I think we'll pass back over to Bernard now, just to see if there are any questions from the floor.
Fabulous. Thank you, John. And I am taking screen control back. There we go. All right. So we already had a couple questions roll in. And if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to submit. The first one, and a very practical one. So how does one find out about the public review timelines for this and any other public reviews, really?
Yes, actually, this is the question that does pop up quite a few times. In terms of what's coming out for public review, and I think, I don't know if I just quickly go to the Cdisc website, Bernard, could you just let me share again, and I'll just take you to a couple of places.
Get the right window open, and I can do that. And then you are now presenter once again.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I just whipped over here. I went to the standards tab on the cdisc.org website, and there is a standards. Oh, there we go. Standards in development tab. There's our COVID-19 project that's being developed at the moment. So there's a lot of work going on in that. But if you click on the standards in development, it does give you an overview of what's currently in development here. Now, this doesn't give you exact dates. That's the only issue, but it does tell you what is coming up, or what potentially is going to be coming up. And I think, yeah, we've got our C-SAE supplement there. So this does give you a little bit of an idea. There's a standard, such as the data exchange standards, and also the TAs, therapeutic areas, in there. Now, once a public review has started, it will be updated with some additional information, as you can see here. But in order to for people to be informed that a public review is starting, the best way is really to create a cdisc.org cdisc.org account. Most people probably have one of these if they've signed up for this webinar anyway, and that will put you in eBlast mailing list, and so you'll get email notification that things are coming up for public review. On most of the web pages, if I go to Cdash, for example, on the standards side, it will also list current public reviews as well. So most of the web pages have this information of what's currently ongoing in the public review phase. So there's a few ways to be able to find out what's ongoing and what's coming up, but I would say the eBlast is the one that's going to tell you that something is starting for sure.
Okay. Well, and while you're here, actually, I'm going to leave control with you, because another question that came in that I think would be helpful to kind of illustrate is somebody asked if I wanted to get involved with this project or any other project for that matter as a volunteer, how would I go about doing that?
Oh, so just checking as I'm muted. There we go. Yes, this is we're going to, so I'll go to cdisc.org because this is one of the processes I send all my volunteers for the teams through. So at the bottom of the main page, you'll see there's a volunteer button. So if I click on volunteer, oh, I have to log in my account. Bear with me 1 second.
And that, yeah, is a good point to note. If you haven't already created one, you should definitely go to the Cdisc website and create a login. Yeah. It's free, and all you got to do is give an email and a password, and that will open up a whole new world of materials. And if you're a member, or if you're employed by an organization that's a member of Cdisc, make sure that you use your work email with your company's domain name, because members get access to discounts on a lot of the purchasable educational materials. But you do need a login to be able to access a lot of this stuff. So if you haven't, go ahead and make one. Okay, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, and that's a good point actually, because of course I've got an account, but I think if you click on the volunteer and you haven't got an account, there's a create account button there to get your one created. But once you have that and you go to the volunteer site, there is a short video to watch. Also, the policies are all listed here, which you need to look through. A couple of acknowledgements at the bottom. And then just some information, brief information about yourself and which team you want to join. So some of the foundational teams are here. The therapeutic areas are listed here as well. But if it was for something like the C-SAE project, then that's the option. There's a C- but mention in the text here that it's for the SAE project, or just tick other and put a little bit of text about wanting to become a member of the C-SAE project. But that's the same for any of the teams. If anybody's interested in volunteering, it would be the same process.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that. If you have any interest in being a volunteer, we always need more people to help out. So I would encourage you to please volunteer for this project and any other one that strikes your fancy.
I've just noticed actually, Bernard, here, there's actually an opt-in for Cdisc News, which is where you'll get the eBlast emails as well. Yeah, if anybody that's joining new, you can make sure you click up on the Cdisc. I think I've been with Cdisc that long. Okay, yeah, so there's some ways to actually sign in to receive information. So standards updates, for example, this is where you'll start to get information about upcoming public reviews, etc.
Yeah, and there are several different options on that too. Like I would encourage you to opt into the education and events emails that are relevant to your region. That just gives you updates on like our new webinars as we add them to our schedule. You can find it all on the website, but it's kind of nice to get it in your inbox and not actually have to go seek it out. But that's particularly important right now because we're pivoting a lot of our material over to more webinars to cover content that we would be covering in our face-to-face training. So that's a good way to stay on top of all of the new things that we're rolling out. So cool. Thanks for showing that, John. I guess the next question, I don't know if you have anything to show on here for this, but somebody was asking, will the additional C-dash metadata be included in the next version of the C-IG? If you've got something to show on the website, I will leave the control with you.
No, but I've got some discussions that we've had about that I could share. And I know Gary's one of our panelists today, and Gary was one of the original C-dash experts for version 1 as well. And I think, Gary, if I remember the conversations, that actually the additional SAE C-dash metadata currently isn't included in the IG from version 1.
Correct.
It was kept separate. Yeah,
that's correct. And part of that is because C-dash is designed to feed into SDTM, whereas the SAE is designed to feed into an SAE message, which isn't managed by Cdisc in any way, shape, or form. So that being said, we did not add that to the IG, or it's basically, that's why we called it a supplement as opposed to incorporating that into the IG.
Now, we have had discussions, more recently about, if we're creating any C-dash metadata, whether it be going to SDTM or not, then actually it should be in the model itself. That metadata should be in the model. Unfortunately, I think the way that the standards releases work, that you can't release an IG without a corresponding model. So I think the next update is due November 2021 for C-dash, or the C-dash model. So we will create metadata for anything new, and of course there'll be the existing stuff from V1 as well. That will be documented, and it will feed into the next model. Now, we're still discussing how best to do that, how best to represent that. There's obviously the C-IG. We can't call this document, the V2 document, an IG, because of course we don't have a corresponding model with the updated metadata to go into. So we are going to keep that called a supplement. But moving forward, we want to certainly make sure that any C-dash metadata gets into the C-dash model. But there's still ongoing discussions, about the details of how that's going to happen. So hopefully, I hope that answers the question.
I believe so. They haven't asked a follow-up, so I think that probably gets that. Okay, perfect. Well, we do not have any more questions at the moment. So thank you to our folks who joined for the Q&A. And John, thank you for putting all this together and presenting everything. I guess I'll go ahead and move on into my outro slides, and we can actually probably wrap this up a little early and give you back a couple more minutes to your days. So moving right along into our upcoming learning opportunities. So as you might imagine, given that many of us are under stay-at-home orders or quarantine or whatever you want to call it, we have had to cancel a number of our upcoming in-person trainings. Or let me amend that. Not cancel, but postpone. We are working with the hosts to figure out new dates later in the year. It's just proving very interesting because we already had a very full schedule of trainings. So we're trying to Tetris those in somewhere. Our Waltham training got postponed, our Bridgewater training in the US. Everything after June or July or so is still currently on the books and unaltered as of this moment. We are obviously, keeping well on top of stay-at-home orders and kind of the general wisdom from our health professionals with relation to the COVID-19 situation. So we will obviously make adjustments as that information comes into us. Same thing for Europe. Our Frankfurt training got postponed. Everything after the summer is still in place. And you can find out all this information on the Cdisc website if you'd like to go check that out. Also with our Asian trainings, our Osaka training that was actually supposed to be happening, I believe, next week, we've had to reschedule that. And our Shanghai training is also being postponed, although I neglected to fix the dates on that. My apologies. That's my bad. But rest assured, it has been rescheduled. So, or it is being rescheduled. Now, in general, our webinars, we're developing a bunch of them right now. We have a lot of them in the works. This is just what we have on the books currently at this moment. Actually, tonight, if you're in kind of the Western countries, and then tomorrow, if you're in Asia, we have our Cdisc implementation on safety data. That's going to be in Mandarin. And then the big one that we've got upcoming, so, we had to pivot our European interchange to do it digitally because of COVID-19. That went really, really well, and we were super happy with it. But one of the difficulties was we had so much content in that conference that we just could not include all of it in the virtual interchange, even though we had it for 2 days. There's only so much content that you can cover in that amount of time. So we decided we would take some of the content and put it into webinar format. The big one that a lot of people are interested in, and it is currently holding the record for the largest number of webinar registrants in Cdisc history, is this Cdisc 360 webinar, where it's a half-day deal, kind of a longer webinar than our normal formats. And we will be diving deep into Cdisc 360. If you haven't registered for it, and I know many of you have because I recognize your names in the registration list, I would encourage you to go register and help bump that number up, because our executive team's super excited about the turnout for it so far. And then another super important one that we have coming up is a lot of our staff people have been just up to their necks in working on this COVID-19 user guide project review. This is very important work, and it's also, as relevant as you could possibly imagine for our current situation. So that's another one that I would highly encourage you to join. And then we also have our quarterly controlled terminology updates for Q3 and Q4 already scheduled. And then you can check out the Cdisc website, where we've got a handful more webinars in the works. We were holding off on scheduling a couple because so many of our staff people are so involved in the COVID-19 project. But we anticipate having several more come on to the schedule sometime soon, so you can just check the Cdisc website for that. On-site training, I leave this in here because we will continue to have on-site training as long as it is feasible. If you're interested in finding out more about how that works in terms of either our public trainings or private ones just for you and your company, you can go to that URL right there and ask us about it. Obviously, we're scheduling them for later in the year, but we would still love to talk to you about it, because we don't have a lot of private training set up, and we would love to set up more. As for other materials, we have our online learning management system. As many of you may be experiencing in social distancing requirements and stay-at-home orders and such, some people, myself included, have found that their regular responsibilities are slightly altered. I work a lot with our face-to-face trainings, and given that we have canceled a lot of them, I've had to pivot my responsibilities a little bit. And it's offered me some more time to do some professional development. You may have that time as well. If you do, I would encourage you to go use your Cdisc website login, go to the education tab, and then go to My Learning, and that will open up our learning management system. And we have tons of online content, coursework. I mean, hundreds of hours going over all of the standards. So this is a great time to kind of, invest in yourself. And again, if you haven't created a login and you're going to go do so, just make sure that you use your company email address so that if you're a member, we can apply any of those discounts that may be relevant. In terms of membership, if you are a member, thank you so much. Your membership is what sustains Cdisc as an organization. We're a membership-based organization, and without your membership, we could not do the great work that we are continuing to do on all of the standards and on super, timely, relevant things like this COVID-19 project. If you're not a member and you're curious about it, then we would love to talk to you. Our membership team you can get in touch with them at membership@cdisc.org, and they would be more than happy to tell you more about us. That way, if you're not perhaps a financial decision maker, you can take some information to those people to try to convince them that, joining Cdisc would be a really good idea. So with that, I've concluded all of my pieces. Again, John, thank you for all the work that you're doing on this project, and to our panelists who also joined, Gary and Karen and Michelle. Thank you for joining us for the short Q&A. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. My email is right there, bklinke@cdisc.org, and I'd be happy to pass your questions along to our panelists. So with that, we conclude things. We'll give you back 7 to 8 minutes of your day. But thank you for joining us, and we will look forward to having you at our next webinar. Until then, everybody, take care and be well.